we all share the same earth and sky. And today what I wanted to talk about is what we practice with consistency. And I learned this in recovery and Zen, and to me they're essentially the same thing, is what we practice with consistency, that's what becomes our area of proficiency. So when I was younger, before using chemicals, I got really proficient because of the depression, ruminating, and just holding my attention in negative thinking mind about all the things that were going wrong. And so because of that, my depression expanded because I practice it all the time, every day, that the rumination became my area of proficiency. And so I got so proficient at rumination and, being depressed and being grumpy and lying to my family about how I was feeling. And they said, "Oh, how are you feeling?" And I'd be like, "Okay." And then I'd trot off to school, just absolutely fucking miserable, because I was going to show up at school and a lot of things were going on there because my brother and I, we were the only persons of color there. And so there was a whole narration about acceptance and this and that and the other thing, this, that, and the third, as the young people say. That's what expanded for me. And then how the next thing that happened, that level of proficiency got me to use alcohol because it altered my feelings. And when I say altered my feelings, is it started helping me to cope with the internal anxiety and depression. And so, and then the weed, the this, the that, and so everything just kind of expanded from there because I allowed that negativity just from that one starting point. Many things progressively became my areas of proficiency to the point where I honestly thought that those areas of proficiency, like the lying, the pretending to be invulnerable, the being physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually unavailable to my family, to my friends, I had the assumption that that's who I was, that I actually had to, thank goodness, because of the people in recovery, they told me just because that's my proficiency, that's really not my identity. And if I changed the things that I practice, that would change the area of proficiency. So the deal was, imitate, assimilate, integrate, innovate. That's the process for me. So I would imitate surrender, which was, instead of people offering me rides, instead of, just saying, "No, I got my skateboard, I'm just going to skate over, I'm cool," I would say, "Okay." And then I was extraordinarily uncomfortable riding in a car or a pickup truck or something to a meeting because they wanted to fucking talk, and they wanted to tell me about recovery and how good life was, or and I'm like, this isn't fucking church for me. I'm not trying to be converted to your bullshit. All I really wanted, bro, was I wanted to get out of trouble with the Department of Juvenile Justice. I wanted to get rid of being a child in need of supervision, and I wanted to be liberated from that because I wasn't interested in going to hickey school, so I would sit there a lot of times, but then eventually they would ask me a question that would make sense, which is like, "So are you sick and tired of being sick and tired of your fucking self?" And I'm like, "Eh?" And it kind of clicked. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm sitting with all these fucking thoughts in my head all the time. I'm a very proficient ruminator. And they would say, "Yeah, me too." And then they would share their experiences with that. And so that was the surrender part. And it was progressive and it took time. And then I realized, because people said it to me directly, here's this list of spiritual principles: surrender, honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, non-isolation, community, Sangha, as some people refer to it as. And I started being around it. And so what changed the area of proficiency is going to meetings every single day for many years in recovery. And then by working the steps, that changed my proficiency. Then learning values instead of trying to figure out who I was. People told me, oh, instead of trying to figure that shit out, why don't you just decide? I'm like, I could decide who I am? They're like, oh, yes, of course. That's kind of like the shortcut. Instead of waiting for it to happen, you could actually influence and make it happen for yourself. We call that, in Narcotics Anonymous, personal responsibility. Ugh. So, my values like abstinence, the resisting of an activity or behavior for a greater good. That was pretty easy because I just wasn't picking up, but then it expanded my area of proficiency. That I found out that I could abstain from what people back in the day called character defects or character limitations, or just straight up that which was holding me back. And so I could practice abstinence from lying. And so instead of pretending like nothing thought or felt wrong with me, I could just tell the truth, allow myself to be vulnerable. I could be more open. I could be more spacious. I became more willing, where instead of hiding out, like as soon as the meeting ended, I stayed around and just like around the edges of the meeting, pretended to look at some fucking pamphlets and this and that. And then I started reading the pamphlets, and I started asking people what things meant, and I started, doing things and just accepting help and becoming more willing and showing up at area service, and then all the things, and then not just having some, bunch of phone numbers in my phone book, actually calling those numbers in my phone book and having meaningful conversations instead of isolating and hanging out. Or when I went through those spells where actually, for whatever reason, however I got there, I stopped calling my sponsor for a month, reintegrated. Someone says, when the last time you talked to your sponsor? I said, I don't know. And then I said, well, if you don't know, that's probably too long. And so why don't you give them a call? And so I did, so I learned how to follow directions instead of fighting directions and taking it as a personal fucking affront, so I also learned how to instead of having a proficiency in grievances, I learned by having an appreciation list which led to acts of gratitude. I learned how to build proficiency in just appreciation and generosity, so I wasn't a fucking grump all the time. It was awesome because there was so much less baggage, there was so much less intensity inside, and then all of a sudden it was easy to honestly, instead of these fake smiles that like people do, like, these days, they're like, okay, they're like there and okay, so, hey, photo op, and you get the fake smile. I learned the natural, authentic smile, through recovery. And so these things, like I said, imitate, assimilate, integrate, and then innovate, it takes time, but essentially it's about the practice leading to proficiency and understanding that it requires a certain amount of conscious contact and effort, and it's a current reflection of identity, but not our essential or core identity, and what I found out, maybe to put a bow on this is, for me, if you ask me, what is my identity? It's my values, because that's how I choose to live. But if my identity is character defects or these negative character traits, mostly from left hemisphere mind, negativity mind, then that's going to be my identity at that time. But it's not persistent. It depends on what I'm practicing and building proficiency in. We all share the same earth and sky. Please have an excellent day because you actually decided to. Hey!